The rain hammered against the iron gates of Willowbrook Estate like nature's own drumbeat of desperation. Through the downpour, a small figure hunched beneath a threadbare coat pressed the buzzer with trembling fingers. Margaret Chen had walked 17 miles through the storm, her worn sneakers squelching with each step, carrying nothing but hope and the weight of 3 days without food. What she didn't know was that behind those towering mahogany doors, another soul was wrestling with his own demons. CEO David Harrison sat in his study, staring at a photograph on his desk, wondering if success meant anything when you had no one left to share it with. Margaret's voice crackled through the intercom, barely audible above the thunder. "Please sir, I don't want charity. I just need work. I can clean your house, scrub your floors, anything. All I ask is for one meal. Just one plate of food." David's hand froze over the security monitor. Something in her voice reminded him of his own mother's words decades ago when they had lost everything. He watched as Margaret wiped rain from her face, her dignity intact despite her circumstances. Instead of turning her away like his security protocol demanded, David found himself walking to the front door. When the massive door swung open, Margaret looked up to see a man in his 50s with kind eyes behind expensive glasses. She had expected security guards or household staff, not the owner himself. David took in her appearance, the way she held her shoulders straight despite shivering, how her eyes met his without shame even though she was asking for help. "Ma'am, you're soaked through," David said gently. "Please come inside before you catch pneumonia." Margaret hesitated. "Sir, I meant what I said. I don't want handouts. I can work for my meal. I used to manage housekeeping at the Grandview Hotel before it closed down. I know how to clean properly, how to handle delicate items. I just need a chance to earn my keep." The sincerity in her voice struck David like lightning. He thought about the army of cleaning services that maintained his 18-room mansion, how they came and went without him ever learning their names. Here was a woman offering to trade her labor for basic sustenance, and she was worried about maintaining her dignity. "Let me get you a towel first," David insisted, leading her into the marble foyer. Margaret's eyes widened at the chandelier hanging above them, worth more than most people's houses, but she didn't gawk or comment. She simply stood where David indicated, careful not to drip water on the Persian rug. As David returned with warm towels and a hot cup of coffee, he noticed Margaret examining a family portrait on the side table. Her expression softened as she looked at the images of David's late wife, Elena, and their daughter, Sarah, who had died in a car accident 3 years prior. "You have a beautiful family," Margaret said quietly. "There's so much love in their eyes." David's throat tightened. I had a beautiful family. They're gone now." Margaret set down her coffee cup, her own grief recognizing his. "I'm sorry for your loss. I lost my husband 2 years ago to cancer. Then the medical bills took our house, and when the hotel closed, I lost my job too. But I can see in this picture that your wife and daughter were lucky to have someone who loved them so much." Something shifted in David's chest. When was the last time someone had spoken to him about Elena and Sarah with such genuine warmth? His wealthy friends always changed the subject, uncomfortable with grief. His business associates saw his loss as a weakness to exploit. But this stranger, who had nothing, was offering him compassion. "Tell me about your husband," David found himself saying as he sat across from Margaret. For the next hour, they shared stories. Margaret spoke about James, a teacher who had volunteered at homeless shelters on weekends. David talked about Elena's charity work and Sarah's dream of becoming a veterinarian. The rain continued outside, but inside the mansion's walls, two lonely hearts found unexpected connection. "You know what, Margaret," David finally said, "I do need someone to help with something special. Tomorrow would have been my daughter Sarah's birthday. She would have been 25. Every year, Elena used to bake her favorite chocolate chip cookies and we'd donate them to the children's hospital. I haven't been able to do it since they died, but maybe with your help." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She would have been the same age as my daughter Katie. Katie lives in Oregon now with her own family. We haven't spoken since the funeral. I said some things in my grief that I regret. David leaned forward. What kind of things? I blamed her for not coming home more often while her father was sick. I was just so angry at the world, and I took it out on the person I love most. Now she won't answer my calls, and I don't blame her. David stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Margaret, I've been angry too. Angry at God, at drunk drivers, at life itself. But sitting here with you tonight, I realize something. Elena always said that the best way to honor the dead is to love the living better. He turned back to Margaret with determination. Here's what we're going to do. Yes, you can help me bake those cookies tomorrow. But first, we're going to call your daughter. Margaret shook her head. Sir, I appreciate the thought, but she won't want to talk to me. David smiled for the first time in months. Trust me on this. I've learned that sometimes when we think we've lost everything, we're really just one conversation away from finding our way back home. The next morning, Margaret stood in David's state-of-the-art kitchen, flour dusting her borrowed apron, while David dialed Katie's number in Oregon. When Katie's voice came through the speaker, confused and cautious, Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for the phone. Katie, honey, it's Mom. The silence stretched for an eternity before Katie whispered, Mom? Where are you calling from? Through tears and halting words, Margaret apologized for the hurt she had caused. She spoke about her pride, her fear, and how losing everything had taught her what truly mattered. Katie cried too, admitting she had been stubborn and scared, wanting to call but not knowing how to bridge the gap her mother's angry words had created. David watched from across the kitchen, mixing cookie dough and remembering his own daughter's laughter. When Margaret hung up the phone, her face was radiant with joy and relief. She's coming for Christmas, Margaret whispered. Katie's bringing the grandchildren I've never met. That afternoon, they delivered 12 dozen chocolate chip cookies to the children's hospital. David introduced Margaret to the staff as his dear friend, and together they watched sick children's faces light up with simple joy. Margaret, who had been invisible to the world just days before, found herself surrounded by tiny arms and grateful hugs. But David wasn't finished. That evening, as they sat in his living room sharing Chinese takeout, he made an offer that changed everything. Margaret, I have a proposition. This house has been too empty for too long. I'd like to offer you the position of estate manager. It comes with a salary, full benefits, and the guest house on the property. But more than that, I'd like you to help me start the Elena and Sarah Foundation. We'll provide job training and housing assistance for people who've lost everything but not their hope. Margaret stared at him in disbelief. David, I can't accept charity. It's not charity, David said firmly. It's partnership. I have the resources, but I need someone who understands what it means to fall down and get back up. Someone who knows that dignity isn't about what you own, but about how you treat others. I need someone who can help me remember how to live again. 6 months later, the Elena and Sarah Foundation had helped 43 families get back on their feet. Margaret had become not just David's business partner but his closest friend. Her daughter Katie visited regularly with the grandchildren who called David Uncle David and filled the mansion with the laughter it had been missing. The foundation's first annual gala was held at Willowbrook Estate, with Margaret serving as the guest of honor. In her speech that night, she spoke about how a simple request for one meal had led to a feast of friendship, purpose, and renewed hope. David watched from the audience, remembering the rain-soaked woman who had pressed his buzzer asking only for a chance to work for food. She had given him far more than clean floors that night. She had given him a reason to live again. As Margaret concluded her speech, she looked directly at David. Sometimes we think we're just asking for bread, but God gives us a banquet. Sometimes we think we're just offering crumbs, but we're actually sharing a miracle. The applause thundered through the mansion, but all David could hear was the echo of Margaret's voice that first night, asking not for charity but for the chance to earn her dignity. In trying to feed her body, they had somehow managed to nourish each other's souls. That night, as the last guests departed, Margaret and David sat on the mansion's front steps, looking up at the stars. "You know what I learned from all this," Margaret said softly. "What's that?" David asked. "Kindness isn't about the size of what we give. It's about the courage to see the person behind the need and respond with our whole heart." David nodded, thinking about how one act of opening his door had opened his entire world. And sometimes the person asking for help is really the one bringing the help we didn't know we needed. This story reminds us that in a world that often feels cold and disconnected, simple acts of human kindness still have the power to transform lives in ways we never imagined. When Margaret knocked on that door asking for one meal, she found a family. When David opened that door to help one person, he discovered his purpose. The next time someone asks for your help, remember Margaret and David's story. You never know if that moment might be exactly what both of you needed to find your way back to hope. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to Pure Kindness Stories for more inspiring tales, and share this message with someone who needs to remember that miracles often come disguised as ordinary kindness. Because sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest changes, and the hungriest hearts are the ones most ready to love.